They were on your television screen, your playlist, your walls. Some of them were beloved, some were feared, some were admired. But today, they are inside a cell, and the faces the world once knew have been replaced by something much harder to look at. These are 10 celebrities currently serving life in prison, and the stories of how they got there. Number 10. Skyler Deleon, the child actor who became something unimaginable. Skyler Deleon had one of the most fleeting brushes with fame in television history. He was a child who appeared in a single uncredited episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers in 1994. A background role, a face in a crowd, the kind of part that would be completely forgotten by anyone who ever watched the show. Nothing about that appearance suggested a future of any particular note. What happened in 2004 was anything but forgettable. Deleon, by then 22 years old and desperate for money, staged an elaborate plan to steal a yacht docked in Newport Beach, California. He had learned about the boat through a classified ad. The owners, Tom and Jackie Hawks, were selling it. Deleon posed as a potential buyer and arranged a sea trial. He brought along an accomplice, Alonzo McChain, who was given weapons to carry aboard under the pretense of a test run. Once the Hawks were on open water and out of sight of the shore, the group overpowered them. Tom and Jackie Hawks, who were grandparents, planning to use the proceeds from the sale of the yacht to start a new chapter of their lives, were tied to the anchor of their own boat and thrown into the water. They drowned. Deleon signed over the pink slip of the yacht and deposited the money into his account. Investigators traced the transaction, found the forged signatures, and eventually connected Deleon to the murders. His then pregnant wife, Jennifer, was also convicted and sentenced to life in prison. So was McChain. In 2009, Deleon was sentenced to death in California. However, in 2019, then-Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a moratorium on all executions in the state. Deleon remains on California's death row at San Quentin State Prison, with the moratorium holding for now. The Hawks family, particularly their children, who lost both parents on what was supposed to be a straightforward yacht sale, became advocates for a law known as Haley and Thomas's Law, requiring stricter procedures in cases involving the taking of lives during crimes against the elderly. Deleon is a name almost nobody knows today. The 1 minute of television he appeared in as a child has nothing to do with who he became. The next case involves someone with a vastly longer career, a figure once described as one of the most versatile comedic performers on television. Number 9. Danny Masterson. From That 70s Show to San Luis Obispo. Danny Masterson was known to millions of television viewers as Stephen Hyde, one of the core characters in the long-running Fox and then CBS comedy That 70s Show, which aired from 1998 to 2006. Hyde was cool, sardonic, and deeply embedded in the show's ensemble. Masterson appeared in virtually every episode across 8 seasons. The show launched or significantly boosted the careers of several other young actors, including Mila Kunis, Ashton Kutcher, and Topher Grace. When the show ended, Masterson transitioned to other work, appearing in Netflix's The Ranch alongside Ashton Kutcher, his former That 70s Show co-star. He was also a prominent member of the Church of Scientology, a religious organization that operates its own internal ethics and dispute resolution processes. That membership became central to how his case was prosecuted and to why it took as long as it did to reach a courtroom. 3 women came forward with allegations that Masterson had committed serious sexual offenses against them during the early 2000s, while he was at the height of his That 70s Show fame. Their attempts to report the behavior at the time had, they claimed, been discouraged through Scientology's internal procedures, which the organization applies to disputes involving its members. By the time law enforcement formally investigated, nearly 2 decades had passed since the events described. Masterson was charged in June 2020. His first trial in November 2022 ended in a hung jury, with jurors unable to reach a unanimous verdict on any of the 3 counts after several days of deliberation. The case was retried in 2023. In May 2023, Masterson was convicted on 2 of the 3 counts, both related to forcible sexual misconduct committed against women in his home in the early 2000s. In September 2023, he was sentenced to 30 years to life in state prison. He was 47 years old at sentencing, which means he will not be eligible for parole consideration until he is 77. He is currently housed at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo. His wife, actress Bijou Phillips, filed for divorce in 2023 shortly after his conviction. She was awarded full legal and physical custody of their daughter. In 2025, Phillips filed a request to legally change their daughter's last name from Masterson to Phillips, a formal severing of the family connection that had been publicly identified with his name. Masterson's legal team continues to pursue appeals. His name, once connected to a beloved sitcom that multiple generations grew up watching, now draws an entirely different association. Next is a case from the sports world, an athlete who spent years on NFL rosters before the law finally caught up with his past. Number 8. Eric Naposki, the NFL linebacker who killed for $1 million. Eric Naposki played professional football in the NFL as a linebacker for the New England Patriots and the Indianapolis Colts during the late 1980s and early 1990s. He was never a star. His career was a series of roster moves and limited playing time, but he played at the highest level of American professional football, which in any other context would have defined his public legacy entirely. Instead, Eric Naposki is remembered for a murder committed in 1994. William McLaughlin was a wealthy businessman living in Newport Beach, California. His girlfriend, Nanette Johnston, also known as Nanette Packard, was secretly involved with Naposki. McLaughlin had a life insurance policy worth approximately $1 million. On December 15, 1994, McLaughlin was shot to death in his own home. He was hit by multiple bullets. The investigation stalled for years without a conviction. What investigators eventually pieced together was a scheme. Packard stood to benefit financially from McLaughlin's death, and Naposki, who had a key to the house and had been seen in the neighborhood, was the triggerman. Naposki was arrested in 2009, 15 years after the murder. The delay had given both him and Packard time to build entirely new lives, but it had not allowed them to escape. Naposki was convicted in 2011 of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Packard was separately convicted of first-degree murder and also sentenced to life without parole. The jury found that the motive was financial, that McLaughlin's death was engineered to unlock the insurance policy, and that Naposki carried out the killing on Packard's behalf. He has maintained his innocence. Appeals have not succeeded. Naposki currently serves his sentence at a California state prison. He is one of the rare cases where a former professional athlete's entire legacy was rewritten by a crime that went unresolved for nearly 2 decades before the full weight of it finally came down. The next figure on this list never played a sport. He built an empire, and his empire, it turned out, was built on something much darker than music. Number 7, Suge Knight, the man who built Death Row Records from Fear. Marion Hugh Knight Jr., known to the world as Suge Knight, was for a specific and defining period in the 1990s one of the most powerful people in American music. He co-founded Death Row Records in 1991 and ran it in a manner that built and amplified some of the most important careers in hip-hop history: Tupac Shakur, Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre. The label's roster during its peak years represented a concentrated burst of cultural force that changed the direction of popular music. Knight's methods were, by all accounts, not gentle. His reputation for using physical intimidation and fear as business tools was widely understood and widely reported. Stories circulated for years about artists and business associates who had been coerced, threatened, or physically confronted. He was sued, arrested, and linked to violence multiple times across the 1990s and 2000s. He was present in the car in which Tupac Shakur was shot and killed in Las Vegas in 1996. Shakur died from his wounds 6 days later. Knight was wounded but survived. He served 5 years in prison in the late 1990s for a parole violation related to an assault. Death Row Records itself ultimately collapsed. Dr. Dre's departure in 1996 removed one of its key creative pillars. Legal battles, financial problems, and Knight's own ongoing legal jeopardy hollowed out the label over the following years. By the late 2000s, the brand that had once represented the dominant force in hip-hop was a fraction of what it had been. Knight continued operating in the margins of the music industry and in the orbit of violent incidents. He was shot at a pre-VMAs party hosted by Chris Brown in 2014 and wounded in the leg. His legal situation grew steadily more complicated. The crime that finally ended Knight's freedom entirely happened in January 2015 on the set of the film Straight Outta Compton in Compton, California. Knight drove his truck into 2 men during an altercation. Terry Carter, a music industry figure who had known Knight for years, and Clee Bone Sloan, who was working on the film as a consultant. Carter was killed. Sloan was seriously injured. Knight fled the scene. He was charged with murder and attempted murder. His legal proceedings stretched over years and included multiple hospitalizations, an alleged stabbing by a fellow inmate, and accusations that he had been poisoned. In September 2018, Knight pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 28 years in state prison. At the time of his sentencing, Knight was 53. He is currently incarcerated at the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility in California. He will be eligible for parole in October 2034, when he will be in his mid-70s. The death of Terry Carter represented the final, irreversible consequence of a lifetime of using force as a management strategy. Up next is one of the most controversial cases on this list. A rapper whose conviction has attracted serious scrutiny, celebrity advocacy, and repeated legal challenges, all of which have so far failed. Number 6. C-Murder, the no-limit rapper whose case divided America. Corey Miller was born in the Calliope Projects in New Orleans, Louisiana, in 1971, the younger brother of hip-hop mogul Percy Miller, known as Master P, and Silk the Shocker. He built his career under the No Limit Records banner, where, performing as C-Murder, he released albums that spoke directly from the world he grew up in. His 1998 debut, Life or Death, was certified platinum. His follow-up, Bossolini, went gold. At his peak, he was one of the most commercially successful figures in the late 1990s Southern rap scene. On January 12, 2002, a 16-year-old named Steve Thomas was shot and killed at the Platinum Club, a nightclub in Harvey, Louisiana, near New Orleans. Thomas had entered the club on a borrowed ID and approached Miller after a performance. A physical confrontation broke out involving multiple people, and Thomas was shot once in the chest at close range. 2 eyewitnesses identified Miller as the shooter. Miller was arrested. His first trial ended in a mistrial. He was retried in 2009 and convicted of second-degree murder by a 10-2 jury vote. He was sentenced to life in prison. He has maintained his innocence throughout. In 2018, both key eyewitnesses recanted their testimonies. Each claimed they had been coerced by law enforcement, held and pressured into identifying Miller against their will. Their recantations generated national attention and renewed calls for a new trial. Kim Kardashian publicly advocated for Miller's release in 2020 and again in 2023, writing that he had spent decades in prison for a crime she believed he did not commit. Every appeal has been denied. A federal judge upheld the conviction in November 2023, ruling that the recantations were not credible given how many times the witnesses had previously identified Miller in consistent testimony across multiple proceedings. The Louisiana Supreme Court unanimously refused to review the case again in February 2026. The court found no basis for reconsideration. Miller remains at Louisiana State Penitentiary. Steve Thomas's family has consistently maintained that Miller is guilty and that the advocacy on his behalf reopens wounds that cannot heal. In 2023, Steve Thomas's brother George spoke publicly about his frustration with the ongoing campaigns for Miller's release, saying that his family cannot properly mourn when the case is relitigated in the media every few years. The case sits in a legal and moral space that no court ruling has fully resolved. 2 families permanently broken, on opposite sides of a verdict that has survived every challenge thrown at it. The story that follows doesn't involve the same kind of contested evidence. It involves a former television actor and a crime that his own children witnessed. Number 5. Michael Jace, the Shield actor who shot his wife in front of his sons. Michael Jace spent more than 2 decades building a solid working-class career in Hollywood. He was not a headliner. He was the kind of actor who appeared in the background of important films, Forrest Gump, Boogie Nights, Planet of the Apes, and in supporting television roles that gave him steady work and modest recognition. His most significant role came on the FX crime drama The Shield, where he played Los Angeles police officer Julian Lowe, a complex character navigating questions of identity and integrity from 2002 to 2008. He appeared in 88 episodes. After The Shield ended, he continued working in smaller roles on television dramas. What was happening in his personal life during those years is less visible in the public record. By 2014, his finances had become strained. He had significant gambling debts. His wife, April, had told him she wanted a divorce, and he had convinced himself, without evidence, that she was involved with another man. On the evening of May 19, 2014, inside the couple's Hyde Park home in Los Angeles, Michael Jace shot his wife, April, 3 times. Their 8-year-old, Nehemiah, was in his bedroom when he heard the shots. He later testified at trial that before the second shot, his father said to his mother, who was an avid runner, words telling her to run to heaven. April Jace, 40 years old, was a financial aid counselor at Biola University. She and Michael had been married for 9 years. She had told him that morning she wanted a divorce and had spent the day with friends. Michael Jace told police afterward that he had initially retrieved the gun, intending to take his own life, then changed course and shot her in the back and twice in the legs. He turned himself in to police shortly after the shooting. The investigation revealed that Jace had deep financial problems he had been hiding: debts to loan sharks, money owed to gambling associates, and a household increasingly under financial stress that April had been largely unaware of. Prosecutors argued that his fear of losing both his wife and his financial stability had driven him to the decision he made. Jace was convicted of second-degree murder on May 31, 2016. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On June 10, 2016, he was sentenced to 40 years to life in prison, 15 years to life for the murder, and 25 years to life for the gun enhancement. He is currently incarcerated at California State Prison, Corcoran. Given his age at the time of sentencing, 53, he will be in his 90s before completing his minimum sentence. His apology in court, delivered directly to April's family, came after her mother had addressed the court in tears. The 2 young boys who watched their father shoot their mother now have to carry that image for the rest of their lives. The next case involves someone who was recognized not by most Americans, but by millions of people who followed his music, and whose fall from that world was nearly as dramatic as his rise within it. Number 4. Big Lurch, the rapper whose crime shocked even hardened investigators. Antron Singleton, known professionally as Big Lurch, had built a modest but real career in hip-hop by the early 2000s. He was affiliated with the No Limit Records ecosystem that had made Miller and Master P famous and had worked alongside significant names in the southern rap scene. He was 21 years old in 2002 and appeared to have genuine commercial potential. On April 10, 2002, in Los Angeles, police received a call about a woman in distress in a residential neighborhood. They found Antron Singleton outside, wandering the street. Inside the apartment, they found his 21-year-old roommate, Tynisha Isaias, dead from a violent attack. The nature of the injuries to her body was severe enough that investigators, including those who had worked serious crimes for years, described the scene as unlike anything they had encountered. Singleton had consumed a large quantity of PCP, a powerful and dangerously unpredictable drug, before the attack. Toxicology results confirmed this. His behavior after the attack reflected the drug's effects on his perception of reality. He had no coherent account of what had happened. He was charged with first-degree murder, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison in California. He is currently housed at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The case is sometimes referenced in discussions about the dangers of PCP specifically, the drug's documented capacity to trigger severe dissociation and uncontrolled violence in users. That context does not mitigate what happened to Tynisha Isaias, who was 21 years old when her life ended in her own apartment, and whose family has had to live with the nature of her death ever since. What follows is an entry that exists in a different category from the cases above. Not a single act of violence, but a decades-long pattern of predatory behavior that finally produced a conviction. Number 3. Harvey Weinstein, the man who ran Hollywood. Harvey Weinstein was for 3 decades one of the most powerful figures in American entertainment. He co-founded Miramax Films with his brother Bob in 1979, and through that company and later the Weinstein Company, he produced and distributed films that won nearly 300 Academy Award nominations: Shakespeare in Love, Chicago, Pulp Fiction, Good Will Hunting, The English Patient. The list is effectively a catalog of prestige cinema from the 1990s and 2000s. His power within the industry was total and was understood to be total. Directors, actors, and distributors operated with awareness of his preferences, his moods, and his capacity to make or destroy careers. He was also, according to the investigative reporting that became public in October 2017, a serial predator who had abused that power to commit serious sexual offenses against women for decades. Reporters Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey at the New York Times published their initial investigation on October 5, 2017. Ronan Farrow's reporting followed in the New Yorker, Within weeks, more than 80 women had publicly named Weinstein. Among them were Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie, Uma Thurman, and Ashley Judd. The accounts spanned from the 1980s through the 2010s. They described a systematic pattern, meetings arranged under false professional pretexts, physical coercion, and a vast infrastructure of non-disclosure agreements maintained by fixers and lawyers to keep the story buried. Weinstein was arrested in May 2018. His first New York trial resulted in a conviction in February 2020, and he was sentenced to 23 years. A California trial followed in December 2022, resulting in a further conviction and a 16-year sentence to be served separately. In April 2024, the New York Court of Appeals overturned his 2020 conviction on procedural grounds related to jury selection and the admission of testimony from prior incidents. A third New York trial was ordered. As of the time of this video, Weinstein, now in his early 70s and reportedly suffering from serious health problems, including chronic myeloid leukemia, remains incarcerated, serving his California sentence. Multiple legal commentators and medical observers have noted that, given the combination of his age, his pending retrial, and the state of his health, he is unlikely to leave prison under his own terms. The industry he built continued without him after 2017. The women who had remained silent for decades because of the infrastructure he maintained finally had a public record to point to. Next is a man who was famous in a way almost nobody under the age of 45 will remember clearly. A children's television icon whose fall was both long in coming and devastating when it arrived. Number 2, R. Kelly, 30 years and counting. Robert Sylvester Kelly was born in Chicago in 1967 and grew up in circumstances that, as he described them in interviews, were marked by poverty and significant early trauma. He taught himself to play keyboard, and by his late teens was performing in Chicago's music scene. His 1993 debut album, 12 Play, went multi-platinum. His follow-up self-titled album in 1995 included the song I Believe I Can Fly, which won 3 Grammy Awards, including Song of the Year, and was used in the soundtrack for the film Space Jam, introducing his name to a generation of children and their parents simultaneously. At his peak, R. Kelly was commercially one of the most successful R&B artists alive, with total record sales that industry estimates placed above 75 million copies worldwide. He wrote and produced for other artists as well. He co-wrote and produced for Celine Dion, Michael Jackson, and Whitney Houston, among many others. He was genuinely transformative within his genre, capable of moving between gospel, hip-hop, and adult contemporary in ways that kept him commercially relevant across multiple decades. The public record of allegations against Kelly stretched back 2 decades before his conviction. Village Voice reporter Jim DeRogatis began publishing documented accounts from women who described his behavior as predatory as early as 2000. A videotape circulated in 2002 that led to a criminal charge of distributing material involving a minor, but the case went to trial in 2008 and ended in an acquittal that shocked many who had followed the evidence. The pattern continued: civil settlements, accounts from former associates, women describing systematic manipulation and isolation, and no conviction. In January 2019, the Lifetime documentary series Surviving R. Kelly changed the scale of the conversation. 6 episodes of detailed, on-camera testimony from women who described years of abuse reached a mainstream audience that had not previously engaged with DeRogatis' reporting. The response was significant. He was dropped by his label RCA Records. Streaming platforms removed his music from curated playlists. Both Chicago and New York State opened new investigations. He was indicted in Illinois in February 2019 and in federal court in New York in July 2019. The New York federal trial began in August 2021. In September 2021, Kelly was found guilty on all 9 counts: racketeering, sexual exploitation of a minor, and sex trafficking. In June 2022, he was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. A separate federal trial in Chicago produced additional convictions on related charges in September 2022, with a 20-year sentence, 19 years of which run concurrently with the New York sentence, adding 1 additional year to his total time. Kelly is currently housed at the Federal Correctional Institution at Butner, North Carolina. He will be in his late 80s before he is eligible for release, assuming no further legal changes. His Grammy Awards have not been revoked. I Believe I Can Fly still plays on radio stations. The gap between the music and what the music's creator was doing for 3 decades remains one of the entertainment industry's most uncomfortable legacies. The final entry on this list is the case that perhaps received more sustained public attention than any other of its era, and yet still divided the country when the verdict finally came down. Number 1. O.J. Simpson, not for murder, but for armed robbery. Orenthal James Simpson was one of the most celebrated athletes in American history. His career at the University of Southern California, where he won the Heisman Trophy in 1968, and with the NFL's Buffalo Bills and San Francisco 49ers, established him as one of the greatest running backs the sport had ever seen. He rushed for 11,236 yards over his professional career and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1985. After his playing career, he became a broadcaster, an actor in films including the Naked Gun series, and one of the most recognizable faces in American advertising, most notably as the face of Hertz Car Rental, where he famously sprinted through airports in television commercials. He was famous in the most complete sense of the word. He was liked. He was considered charming and accessible. He had moved successfully through the post-sports celebrity world in a way that only a handful of athletes have ever managed. The trial that followed his 1994 arrest for the murders of his former wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman became the most watched legal proceeding in American television history. An estimated 150 million people watched as the not guilty verdict was read in October 1995. The country divided immediately, and along lines that had little to do with the specific evidence. Polls showed deep racial and demographic splits in how Americans interpreted both the verdict and what it meant. In 1997, a civil jury found him liable for both deaths and awarded $33.5 million in damages to the families of the victims, a judgment he largely avoided paying by establishing residency in Florida, which at the time had stronger protections against judgment collections from civil verdicts. He moved to Las Vegas. He played golf. He granted occasional interviews. He was, for years, largely invisible to the machinery of criminal justice. In September 2007, Simpson led a group of men into a room at the Palace Station Hotel in Las Vegas. His stated goal was to recover sports memorabilia he claimed had been stolen from him. The means he used was armed robbery. The group carried weapons, and the men in the room were held at gunpoint while the items were taken. One of the men in the room he robbed had previously assisted him with memorabilia dealings. He was arrested, tried, and in October 2008, exactly 13 years to the day after his 1995 acquittal, convicted on 12 counts, including armed robbery and kidnapping. He was sentenced to a minimum of 9 years in state prison without parole eligibility. The maximum was 33 years. Simpson was granted parole in July 2017 and released from Lovelock Correctional Center in October 2017 after serving 9 years. He died of prostate cancer on April 10, 2024, at the age of 76, at his Las Vegas home. He was never convicted for the 1994 killings. He was never absolved of the civil judgment against him. He served 9 years for an armed robbery in a Las Vegas hotel room involving memorabilia from his own sports career. The sentence, the acquittal, the civil verdict, and the manner of his death closed one of the most complex and contested chapters in the history of American celebrity and law enforcement. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.